Welcome to Idle Red Hands Weekly. I'm Jeremy.
I'm Chris.
And this week on the Weekly, Single Artist RPGs, Warhammer releases an inclusion statement, DC Comics leaves Diamond, Swords and Wizardry by Frog God Games, The Dark Eye 2 second bundle of holding, and the Wretched and Alone Game Jam deadline extended. So how's it going?
Yeah, all right. We are entering the one season of Japan known as Muggy AF.
Yes, right.
Also possibly typhoon season. We'll see what's going to happen, yeah.
Right, yeah, we've got this, the rains are coming, for this next few weeks, and then we'll see. Which I'm glad it already started to rain, because sometimes when that gets delayed, then that means typhoon season gets delayed and everything
gets delayed. Is there someone out there making a decision? Okay, let's hold off the rainy season for a bit.
There's a committee, I've heard. Well, something that I saw online, D20 Radio has an article about the rise of the single artist game.
Okay.
And it touched on a lot of games that we've liked and we're interested in. And they just talked a little bit about how the economics and the kind of motivation to do that is. So what I mean, for example, is Tales from the Loop. So that's based on Simon Stolenhag's art. And then also a game that we mentioned, Never Going Home, is based on the art of Charles Ferguson Avery. They talked to Brandon K. Atten of Wet Ink Games about how they made that decision and how they chose to do that. And he made a couple of interesting points. Basically, that game was inspired by the illustrations. And so they licensed the illustrations and then commissioned him or paid him to do additional work to support the game.
Okay.
What's the allure of that, or what's the motivation to do something like that? One of the things, of course, is uniform look. So it's very recognizable. With that uniform visual style, it kind of gives a strong identity to games.
Right.
And I think that's why you're seeing a lot of those on Kickstarter as well. Because if you're a fan of that art, or if you're drawn in by that art, then you'll check out the game system and you check out the gameplay. And so this is kind of motivated by things like comic books. It's very often comic books, or even some indie video game development is, single artist, single programmer, single writer, single
programmer.
Yeah. Okay. So some small indie games are just a two people job. So you see that very common, even in children's books. That's kind of a common thing, and less so in RPGs, but now that's becoming a thing because of that identity. And then it's the thing that they said is a good advantage. It's a single point of contact. So you get one artist you're relying on. They're keeping their deadlines. They're doing well. It's fine. There's a lot less management.
No, I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah. And the other thing that they said is it does raise the budget a bit, because especially if you're commissioning original art, because if you're just going to a royalty-free, grabbing some illustrations or grabbing some photographs, that's going to be a lot cheaper of an art budget, but you're going to lose that identity. You're going to lose that edge that may get you noticed online in a very crowded market.
That's a good point. And I guess, we've all flipped through RPG books where this cover looks awesome. The first couple illustrations are awesome. Then you hit like a spot piece or a filler piece that the style is very different.
Right.
And that doesn't necessarily mean bad. It just means, wow, the style of this is noticeably different. And sometimes that can be pretty jarring. When you said single artist RPG, I didn't realize you had meant like actual artist. I thought you meant like creator.
Oh, right.
I think putting up stuff on itch and getting most of my games now from itch, that's a lot of single creators.
Oh yeah,
that sounds like a dating site. A lot of
looking for love.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of indie RPG creators who basically have to kind of do everything in terms of writing, layout, and art. And that's kind of what I thought you meant. And I guess it's interesting that we might be seeing more of that, at least art-wise, in the bigger kind of non-indie productions.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so I think the only kind of danger of it is you could, if somebody has amazing art, you may not have a great game attached to it, and it's still going to sell because people are looking at the art and it's like, wow, this isn't really a game, but I love how it looks.
But from a business standpoint, is it a downside?
Yeah,
because the person has already bought the product.
That's true. They bought the ticket. Yeah, that's true. But another example would be like Mjorkborg by Johan Nohr. He was the artist that did all of that work, and that has a real identity, a real strong kind of visual identity. I came across this article. There's great interviews with a couple of heads of the different kind of smaller game studios and talking about the kind of pros and cons and why the kind of sudden rise in this. And I do think because big scale productions, like I've noticed in D&D and Pathfinder, you do go through the book and say, ooh, that's a real filler kind of piece of illustration. Yeah. And so it is nice. And to know, especially with Kickstarter, because it's kind of lined up that way, to feel like you're directly supporting someone. If it's one artist, you feel like you're directly supporting that artist's career. And that feels a little bit better than, well, we're supporting an agency that supplied us with the people that provided us with this art. So yeah, there's something that I think works with Kickstarter and single artist games.
No, I'd agree with that, yeah.
So I'll put a link to that article. So that's D20 Radio. And the writer was Egg Embry and the Rise of Single Artist RPGs. So Chris, Do you know what I love about Warhammer?
The fact it changes every 2 years and obsoletes large swath of models in the process?
But other than that,
Other than that, okay.
I love that Warhammer is for everyone.
Okay, I'm curious to see where this is going.
Games Workshop released an inclusivity statement, and I think they went to inclusivity.org and downloaded the boilerplate,
Okay.
fill in your name here kind of form and posted it on their website. So it was pretty standard and pretty weak, but there's a couple interesting things about it.
Okay.
They're admitting they have a problem. They're admitting that because if you have to say, we don't want you in our community and this is what our community is about. So wait a minute. So you think there are undesirable people that enjoy your game?
I hadn't made that connection. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but I accept your point. I see what you are saying.
And that's the first time they've and I guess because Games Workshop has been terrible with social media and terrible with their online presence and even kind of fell out of the tournament, even running their own tournaments for a while.
Okay,
Yeah.
I was kind of unaware of that.
And so the connection with their fans, they just kind of ignored their fans and did what they want. And so, and I guess maybe just let that fan base just
Fester?
fester and become pretty miserable and really negative about every decision they made or any change they made. And it seems like that. Yeah, every new edition comes with a big, overwhelming boo, and this is going to suck, and Warhammer's dead. 40K is dead.
D&D any different though, or
No,
other
that's-
big name products?
No,
any
that's
different?
true. That's really true. Is that any change is like, we've invested so much in this. This is our game, and what are you doing to it?
That's what I was thinking,
That's
yeah.
very true. The other thing, along with talking about inclusivity,
Okay.
the one thing that's completely not in this message that they do have a big problem with is if you can't afford this game, you are excluded.
Okay. Okay.
And this is one of the most expensive hobbies
It is.
around. And to completely kind of ignore that, if you're going to have something, if you're going to say this game is for everyone, we want everyone to be represented in there. And what about the poor kids? And we want to be careful they're not going to mention anything economic because
of course not,
you're
yeah.
drawing a line, and you're also saying, well, there are people that don't have access to resources and wouldn't necessarily have the discretionary income to invest in something as ridiculous as this, but we're not going to donate models to any sort of school programs, or we're not going to do anything that's going to fund people that couldn't actually afford this game being able to afford this game, or make even an affordable version of this game to let people participate.
That's interesting. And I honestly had not considered it, and I'm kind of not sure how to respond because I saw the inclusivity statement as well. You're right. It was kind of boilerplate, not that strong. Someone pointed out that this is pretty much the first time Games Workshop had done anything like that.
Right.
Which, and I'm not going to try and like measure the effect, but is significant just from the fact that this is the first time they've actually put out something like that as a company and kind of, I guess, acknowledged the problem or acknowledged diversity and inclusion matters. I'm not sure how to tackle that resources thing because that's a really good point. Warhammer is really expensive hobby, and people without those disposable funds are excluded from the hobby.
Right.
Wow. I was going to say their whole business is selling models.
Right.
So they're also they're a publicly held company.
Yeah, right.
With,
Publicly traded. And they're like, I think, $1 billion company now.
oh, really? Are they? Okay. And they couldn't say anything about lack of income
Right.
because of that. I think.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
like I'm absolutely not saying that's a positive. I'm just saying I would have been extremely surprised to see anything along those lines.
Yeah, but it's just funny that you can't ignore that as part of what's excluding people. Like economic, barriers are what keep people out of a lot of situations.
That's a really good point. You kind of can't ignore how that's tied into a lot of other stuff, and to acknowledge, I guess, ethnicity and all that kind of stuff, while then ignoring how socioeconomic status can be tied up in that. Yeah,
it's a strange thing because I'm on. This is going to sound pretty weird, but I'm on Games Workshop's side as far as pricing because I'm okay with things costing a ridiculous amount of money, that being like clothing or, furniture, anything. If it's domestically made, if there's not child labor, if there's not, prison labor, putting things together and being done in countries where they're taking advantage of like disparity in economies between different countries. So I'll support ridiculously priced stuff because as far as their, except for, I guess, some terrain that they've been producing lately, everything is produced as far as their models in the UK.
Okay.
So they cast that plastic in the UK, and so that's employing people in the UK. But the thing that I did notice, though, is all of their publishing happens in China.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know how much. I mean, why are those books $50 if they're making them in China? That's a hard thing to kind of get around.
Good question, and I can't answer that because I don't know how much actually goes to writers or
oh, that's true. Yeah, right.
But basically, what you're saying is you're willing to pay more for fair labor practices and stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely. And so I mean, I've always been of that mindset that the price, you shouldn't consider the price when you're comparing it to someone that's manufacturing completely in China as opposed to somebody that's going to maintain a domestic, support a domestic market or support a domestic labor force.
Well, I guess the way I've always looked at it too is Games Workshop is a very expensive hobby. And while I guess it is kind of similar to D&D, but the thing is like people say Warhammer 40K or Age of Sigmar when they mean all miniature war games? I don't think so. I think the field is kind of diverse, or there are enough other products out there where even if Games Workshop has a large percentage of the market, it's not like a monopoly, or it's not this sort of giant monolithic
that's true.
organization dominating the hobby. So while they are expensive and I guess that price does exclude people from participating, it's not as if there aren't other options.
Yeah, to get into that specific hobby, there are so many people that are doing kind of different workarounds. I mean, there's kind of gray market way to play 40K is to just use Tabletop Simulator, So So there's a lot of ways people have gotten around the expense of the hobby. And then there's, buying used models and a lot of companies that are doing kind of proxy models and things, although it's not a heck of a lot cheaper to proxy stuff. Yeah, so it's an interesting question. And I think they felt obligated. I think they're trying to kind of modernize the company and keep it from being so old-fashioned and just kind of ignoring kind of socio-political environment that they're in and that they're trying to find customers in. It kind of rang pretty hollow, and it sounded kind of like they just were obligated to do it.
Oh, maybe. I think I forget when it came out, but I think they ended up. I feel like that came out sooner than the one for WotC and D&D. Maybe I'm entirely wrong, though. Maybe someone just pointed it out.
I noticed this one first, I guess because it is so unique for Games Workshop to make such a fuss. But so that was interesting. The funny thing is and especially because this is, Grimdark 40K, I love the last line of the statement is, we're glad you're part of the community. If not, you will not be missed.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
we will not mourn you. We will not. Nobody will mind your death from the hobby. Yeah.
Your body's gonna turn into corpse starch.
Right.
I feel kind of guilty now because talking about all this the expensive Games Workshop hobby. Guess what I just pre-ordered?
What did you?
Physical copies of Age of Sigmar Soulbound and Wrath and Glory RPG.
Oh, nice. Oh, excellent.
I don't know what came over me.
Yeah.
I just you know what? I talk about them a lot. I've tried to hack them for different systems. Why not? Okay, let's see what the official RPGs for both of these things look like. And as I mentioned before, I had also picked up the free adventures. Right. For both Wrath and Glory and Age of Sigmar Soulbound. Got them from the Cubicle 7 website, which means I got free PDFs with them, and have just started skimming through Wrath and Glory. My opinion, a big mistake. It's almost a 400-page book. They don't talk about the core mechanic of the game until page 150 something.
Oh, wow.
Where I'm one of the players who, during character creation or reading character creation, I say, great, I need to know how the game works for all these things to make slightly more sense.
Right.
Because otherwise, what does Athletics 3 mean? Tell me how the game works so then I can kind of see how the characters interact with the system and don't duff it all the way back on the middle of the book before you figure out, hey, here's the core mechanic. So
it sounds like they made some interesting decisions with Wrath and Glory to kind of make it a little less endless, a little less infinite. They kind of limited.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they limited where you're playing this
game. They did.
Yeah,
I think they limited where you're playing. I haven't gotten to the setting yet, but I would say it's almost more open than the old games.
Oh, yeah?
Where the archetypes, you have everything in those archetypes. I mean, they're broken into tiers. And honestly, who wants to play tier 1 when you're you're barely a guardsman? You're just the guardsman janitor, right? At tier 1. And tier 3 is Adeptus Astartes, Space Marine. But also in there are Orc Commandos and Chaos and Eldari as well, where I'm just I don't know how I feel about that. Because my feeling is kind of kitchen sink games lose their focus.
Yeah.
And I've played with players who would be like, okay, we're playing a vampire game. Great. Can I be a werewolf? What did what did we just say? You know? Yeah. So yeah, mixed feelings on that. Yeah, so I guess that leads back to the me saying it kind of feels like, even though that maybe the scope or the geographic space is limited, it feels like they're trying to put a lot more options in the book than the more tightly focused Rogue Trader or
like the
only
Fantasy
war.
Flight.
The Fantasy Flight. That's what it was, the Fantasy Flight one, where it's like you're only Inquisitor, you're only Spaceman, and sure, those systems worked to get together or had the potential to, but now it's like we're going to put everything in here. So
interesting. And I think they did that geographical restriction to not overlap with lore, because
probably
40K is so heavy with lore, they don't want you like, but we killed the
It's like, so we're going to put it over here on the side of the Great Rift where no one's explored yet, so you can do whatever you want. But I mean, on the other hand, that's true with like any TTRPG based on an existing franchise.
Right.
And as I've mentioned before, I often kind of get bogged down with that, where sometimes it's better to just say, great, all that canon stuff happened. In our game, this is what's going on, and just sometimes ignore it.
Yeah, that's a topic that's going to be coming up on a future podcast. I wanted to talk a little bit about my Star Wars experience, and I think Star Wars has that problem.
It does.
Yeah, it's a little too canon heavy now, so you're like, well, wait. Because one of the funny things that came up in the few sessions that I was in is we saw a Star Destroyer, and it's like, oh, the Imperials. It's like, no, they're not the Imperials anymore. It was like, okay, so who are they? I don't know. So we had this, like, in character, we had this conversation. We have no idea who those are, but they're coming after us. So the topic is going to be playing Star Wars.
Okay.
So Lyle has experience with the West End D6 games. Chris is playing a Powered by the Apocalypse version of Star Wars online. I played the Edge of the Empire, which is the Fantasy Flight kind of Genesis system. The crazy interpretive dice system.
The chicken cut dice.
Right. So we'll kind of compare and see like what you need, and so I have some definite opinions after that experience and wanted to go through that. So it'll be interesting to see. And I have a feeling that what would work best would be Powered by the Apocalypse.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I have a feeling, because I don't know. Yeah, it's a little distracting when it becomes like a trivia discussion, or you're like, who was the let's not care about that right now. So that's a thing. And so I guess that'll probably extend more broadly into, established IP, licensed IP games. Does that bog things down, or do you want to? And I guess even D&D has that now that they've established.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
There are these things that are established. You just can't. Orcs don't do that in Forgotten Realms, or you have to be kind of specific or sensitive to the established lore. But
I know you don't.
I don't think that makes fun for a fun role playing, and especially because the world building is kind of the fun, a big thing that connects you to the world and makes you enjoy. Gaming in it. That will happen as soon as we can all physically be in the same place at the same time. But a discussion of how to play Star Wars, and like what various options are and what would be a good choice. We're getting a little bit of an idea of what the world is going to look like post-pandemic. I don't know.
Are we?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if we're ever going to be post-pandemic. It might be an ongoing, an endless thing. But one thing that did happen that is going to kind of change the landscape of comic books is DC left Diamond Distribution.
Explain it to me like I know nothing about comic books, because that is actually the case.
So DC is owned by Time Warner. During the pandemic, Diamond Distributors, who is the sole monopoly distributor of everything comic books, everything that goes to comic book shops, direct sales, is through Diamond.
Like absolutely everything, including like indie comics. Like
everything.
Everything for DC, or everything.
No, everything you see in a comic book store, they got in a box that said Diamond Distribution on
I find that very hard to believe, but wow, okay.
Well, if you saw the Zoom conference, the guy
not having my calls monitored. No, thank you. Yeah.
The guy said everything except for forget about it when he was negotiating with the stores.
Okay.
It was a little suspicious how they got that monopoly. But anyhow, all comic book stores use Diamond Distributors. I think you could probably use other sources, but Diamond Distributors bullet its way into owning everything, and they basically sent out a catalog that the stores just ordered from, and also customers would kind of pre-order from. During the pandemic, they stopped all shipments just before anybody had any idea what was going on. They said, our warehouses are closed. We're not paying anybody. We're not doing anything. We'll pay you when we'll pay you later when we've got money.
Wow. Okay.
And then they had that conference, the video conference, where they just said, okay, here's the payment plan that we're going to kind of catch up with everything we owe on. And they can do that because they are a monopoly.
Right.
And I think DC said, yeah, we're kind of done with that. And so they made an announcement, and just a few days ago it became official. But they started doing this once Diamond just collapsed or whatever they did. After 25 years of DC being distributed exclusively by Diamond Comics Distributors, they're ending that relationship. DC is going to use Penguin Random House for anything that's a
graphic
book.
novel?
Yeah. So graphic novels and books. And then they're going to use, floppies and periodicals are going to go through Lunar or UCS. So that's a totally different way to handle everything that they did. It's going to split things up. If Marvel stays with Diamond and DC does their own thing, it'll be interesting to see if that gives them any sort of competitive edge. And because they can offer different things. So Diamond does not offer returns.
Right.
So a comic book store there's all these weird incentives, variant covers the stuff. So if you order 200 copies, you get one of these variant covers you could probably sell for $100 at your store. Okay. So there's all these kind of shady practices that are going on and no returns. So you order these ridiculous books that don't sell. These shops they're not huge spaces. They're stuck with all of this inventory. And so then they have the quarter bins or the dollar bins where they're trying to get rid of stuff that they can't return.
Right.
Which is totally different from the book markets where there's, mass market books can be returned.
Oh, really? Okay.
You can strip books or they remainder them and then they go back to the publisher and then they can be resold as overstock somewhere else. DC is making this change. So they said that they didn't make the decision lightly and it follows a long period of thought and consideration. This is kind of their official statement. The change in direction is in line with DC's overall strategic vision intended to improve the health and strengthen the direct market because places like grocery stores or drugstores, when you see the barcode on the comics, those can be returned. They can stamp those as unsellable and return them, and they just pulp them. But that doesn't really exist anymore. You don't see a lot of comic books in various places. Now, I think like Walmart is starting to do some special deals, special arrangements. Yeah, you don't see that as much as it used to be in the past. So the direct market is the main way that comic books get out there. DC made this move, and so it's going to kind of force other people's hands, especially so that might make their deal more favorable with Diamond because Diamond wants to keep everybody, or they may be able to be a little bit more agile and kind of be more competitive. But the funny thing is, as soon as Diamond said, okay, I guess we'll pay you and I guess there will be life after this, health crisis, they started this kind of ridiculous, put this logo on all your comics, our comeback is going to be real great.
Oh, right.
And it hasn't been established yet. I mean, there's so many books that have been canceled, so many things that have just been pushed 6 months, next year. And so nobody knows the health of this industry. And already Diamond is saying, here's our comeback. We're doing great, guys. So they're a cheerleader to a possibly collapsed, broken industry.
Don't you think you kind of, in a sense, have to do that though?
I think they do. Yeah, they have to, because otherwise people are just going to give up on them.
Otherwise it's like, well, we're all done. You're going to be like preaching doom and gloom. You kind of have to be like, okay, this is going to be our comeback.
Right.
And through the power of positive thinking, whether it's actually true or not, I think any business in that situation would have to do something similar.
Yeah, that's very true.
I didn't know all that about distribution. I mean, because pretty much the only thing I ever looked at in comic book shops were role-playing games. I was like, okay, let's walk through the comic section because I don't care. Do you have any role-playing game books? No. Okay, never mind. Yeah.
One thing I wanted to mention, the new bundle of holding, all the PDFs you ever wanted, they're doing a second, The Dark Eye. So The Dark Eye is like an 1983 German fantasy RPG. Okay. So it's like the #1 fantasy RPG in Germany. Recently, Ulysses Spiel, North America, has been translating them in English. And so this is a second version of this. So it's beyond the core book. It's more setting. And so, yeah, this is new companions with the recent English language versions for the rules, location source books, and scenarios. And also atmospheric music.
Ooh.
That will open up the new frontiers in the realms of Aventuria.
I have never successfully incorporated music into a campaign because I've always worried too much about what song is playing when to fit the mood. And
right.
Players just change that too quickly. I'm like, oh, we're going to fight now. Okay, let's give better music. Oh, now we're going to do this. And I'm just like, I've given up.
Yeah. It's not an easy. You have to be GM and DJ.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know,
yeah. I'm already doing enough GM and DJ.
Right. So if you're interested in that game, there's more available now. And if you supported the first one, they're going to update everything in that original bundle from 2018. Oh, cool. So your Wizard's Cabinet, I think it's called.
Yes, yeah.
Will have updated versions. So I'll put a link to that and take a look. So that's happening for another few more weeks. Oh, and you mentioned the Wretched and Alone Game Jam.
Yeah, so there's two things on itch. One, the Wretched and Alone Game Jam, the deadline for submissions got pushed back to June 30th.
Okay.
So still about 2 weeks as of this recording,
which
means I might be able to make it.
Nice.
Who knows? That depends entirely on my toddler.
Right.
Itch put out a huge bundle called the Bundle for Racial Justice and Equality. As of this recording, it has 1,637 items in it for the cost of $5.
Whoa.
Of course, like you can up that as well.
Right.
I forget exactly how much. I'm sure proceeds are going to go to, I think it's the NAACP. It's currently raised over $5 million.
Wow.
Like I said this on Twitter because a lot of people in the indie TTRPG sphere that I'm kind of on the periphery of distribute and make stuff for itch. They were talking about pricing, and on the one hand, this has put games in front of a lot of people who wouldn't otherwise buy it. I think someone said the bundle is actually advertised or mentioned on Forbes.
Oh, wow.
The other thing is it's raised over $5 million for the buy-in of $5. And people who use itch, especially indie TTRPG creators, rely on those sales often to eat or pay rent.
Right.
So all those things I think are true, and it kind of feels like there's been a big discussion around what things should be priced. And yeah, so I think it's interesting to see what's happening with this in terms of like donations and who is contributing to the bundle. And I guess I should point out, not everything in that bundle is a TTRPG. It covers the entire gamut of like assets for game creation, like downloadable video games, pen and paper games, stuff like that. And as we discussed last time, a way to find TTRPGs is in the, I guess, one of the drop-down menus. There's an option for physical games.
Right.
Which that's the one you want to click on if you're not interested in video games, like I am.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's a little bit confusing because it is just digital. I mean, they are offered physically, you said, but that's up to the creator to actually be able to fulfill that. If they're going to do a physical book, they have to be able to ship it or have it printed by a print on demand.
Which is kind of one of Itch's downsides. I think the difference between itch.io in terms of what's physical and what's digital is this like, do you download an executable file? Then it's a video game and it's not physical. Do you download a PDF? Yes. Okay, then they count it as a physical game.
Yeah, so I guess a programmer wrote those terms. Yeah, this is not executable code, so it must be physical. It must be part of the analog world. Right. So something else that came up, Lyle has been playing in a campaign of original D&D, so kind of white box D&D. And just recently, that group switched over to Swords and Wizardry by Frog God Games. So that's an OSR update of the original game. So basically a streamlined version of white box D&D. And so that's going to happen on Sundays, and I'll join that campaign. And the interesting thing that they're doing, they're trying to run it as close to original style as possible. So if a player joins the game, you join at level 1, depending on where the other characters are in the campaign. You're going to come in as real weak, probably need some protection. I'm really curious, and I read through a bit of the rules for Swords and Wizardry, and it's nice. So they talk about it being streamlined, and it is really easy to get into. And I think that's a big complaint that people had with original D&D is there's questions. And this is, of course, back before the days of FAQs and people really being able to go back and forth about how does this work in rules. There weren't forums or anything for people to discuss things. There are some things that just never got resolved rule-wise that I think some of the updated OSR versions handle well. So I'm very curious to play this. We will see. So that's Swords and Wizardry by Frog God Games. I'll put a link to that, to their website, in the description. And maybe Lyle and I can do a little discussion about what it's like to actually play old school D&D, even if it's a slightly modified system. Yeah, I'm really excited to see how that goes. So where can people find you?
On Twitter, as always, Hivemind, HYVEMYND, where I'm currently ranting about Wrath and Glory and how I personally don't need to know the mechanical difference between a Godwin style and Stalker pattern bolt gun.
It's like a point or two somewhere. Yeah, right.
Like I'm sure people do, and I'm sure that's why they buy the game. I looked at it and said, don't need it. How about you?
And I do a weekly single panel gag cartoon. So that's Monday nights in North American time. And that's abusecartoons.com is the website. You can follow me on Twitter at abusecartoons. And the live stream is on both Twitch and YouTube, with a notification on Facebook. I guess there's a Facebook page for the cartoon as well.
It's about 2 hours late, isn't it? Probably.
Right, yes. And if you'd like to see the archive of that cartoon and read 17 years of that nonsense, you can go to gocomics.com/domestic abuse. And if you'd like to get in touch with Idle Red Hands, the website is idleredhands.com. You can follow us on Twitter at Idle Red Hands. We live stream on Twitch, and there's a YouTube channel with all of our video reviews and some actual plays and all kinds of good stuff. If you want to support the podcast and get involved, please visit patreon.com/idleredhands. So that's it for this week. And I thought an
closing statement.
Yeah, an appropriate thing that Games Workshop should have said. They didn't need to go through that whole statement that they prepared. They could have just said, you may not be interested in Warhammer, but Warhammer is interested in you. That's a misquoted Trotsky quote, but I thought it was funny thought it was funny in terms of Warhammer.
I was thinking some kind of like quote along the lines of, like, blessed is the mind too small for doubt, or something along like that. That's from one of the margins of the old 40K books. Yeah.
Oh, that would have been good too. Yeah, it didn't have the tone, I think, of 40K is where they dropped the ball. So we'll see you next week.
Later, mortals.
Bye.